on Stitches TV, we're going to have a go at creating the perfect party dress. It's a bit of a posh Halloween party dress, and it uses the perfect party dress pattern from our Etsy page. Now, if you're printing off this pattern as a PDF download, can I recommend that you only print pages 1 to 10, because you can set that when you do your printing. The reason why is because the next kind of, 15 more pages are simply an enormous rectangle. This is my front, and I've decided that I'm going to do a kind of box pleat at the front. Now, my box pleat, if I show you on the other side, you can sort of see how deep it is. Now, like I said, I always do a notch for the centre, and I've done a notch for the centre down at the bottom by the hem as well, which helped me locate where to put the box pleat, so it was in the centre. So all I did was I just folded a piece over like that, folded a piece over like that, held it with pins in the middle. But you want to know how deep how deep they are, don't you? So they go to about there. So that is. On each side, they are kind of like 3 inches, bit of a small 3-inch, which is 7 centimetres deep. So each of those. So first of all, for what I'm doing today, I want to just stitch those into place. So I'm just going to sew straight across here with a fairly large stitch, just to keep it in place. Now, if you're gathering it, which is the easiest thing for you to do, then you will just gather it all the way along, and and just make it fit to the size of the bodice. So I just start at the edge of the box pleat. I'll try not to put my hand there. I've got a fairly large stitch. I'm not going backwards and forwards because I don't need to. But when I get to the end of that box plate, I am just going to go backwards and forwards there. And then stop when you're at the edge of that other box plate. So can you see that? And then beginning, I don't know, like a little bit away, inch away from the edge of the fold of the box plate. Okay, I'm going to turn my stitch on my sewing machine up to number 4 so that I can begin to do a large stitch to do the gathering. But you do not go backwards and forwards, okay? So that's just a large stitch going along. And I'll stop maybe about an inch away from the edge. No backwards and forwards, very important. Right, now for those of you that don't know about gathering, we have got a tutorial on how to make a maxi skirt, and we talk about it a lot in there. But basically you only pull one thread, not the top and the bottom. You choose which one, and then you just gently start gathering up your fabric. Now really, in the laws of sewing, you should be doing 2 rows, because if you do 1 row, your thread could actually snap, and that's really annoying. So I'm taking a risk at the moment, and I am doing 1 row, I think. So just sort of roughly do it an amount, and then just go on and do the other side as well. So you're going to do the same thing, and you're going to start there, come across, stop an inch away from the fold of your box pleat, and do your gather. how to sew the band bodice front version of the perfect party dress. So we've cut to a fold in our outer fabric and to a fold in the lining fabric, and we've done our notches. So we've done the notches, and I've also notched where the fold is as well, at the top and at the bottom. So another thing that I like to do is I like to, where the notch is at the top and then the centre of the dart where it folds, I like to press those lines because I think it makes it a lot easier to sew. And then I've done the same on the lining as well. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to sew one of these darts closed. So I'm going to fold it over, and where that second notch is, I'm going to start at the top, coming down, so it's starting really close to the fold, coming down, and then I'll go backwards and forwards at the end there. And then I'll do the same on the other side, and then exactly the same on the lining. Now I know you'd want me to sew this in red so you can actually see it, but I really want this dress and I don't really want it to have red stitching, so sorry. That's not happening today, but can you see that? So I've started there. I probably should have gone a bit more gradually, but anyway, I've come down and I finished there. So we need to do that. We need to press it towards the side seams. So you press this towards the side seams, but we need to do it to all of those darts on the front bodice. So I've done that to the front bodice band. I've done it to the lining as well, which is going to go right sides together eventually, and I've also done it to the back now, and also to the lining for the back. Now I have attached the ties for the back. I've just attached them on already because I was having a look at them. But I'm going to show you what you do now for attaching them onto the front, because it will be exactly the same thing and it's very easy. But I can't emphasize enough, not only do you have to keep track of which way up your lining should be, and it's usually with the widest part of the dart at the bottom, okay, but don't mix up your front and backs because that wouldn't be good. So I'll put that out the way for now. So this is my front, okay? That's the top and this is the bottom, and I know that because the dart is bigger at the bottom. Now I'm going to get my ties. So that's the right way round. I'm going to put the fabrics right sides together. Now for me, I want it to be on the outside of the dart with a little overhang. And then the same on the other side. I'm putting it on the outside towards the side seam on that side of that dart at the front, okay, like that. Now on the pattern it shows a small little notch which is the seam allowance for attaching the lining on, or the facing or the lining on. Now you don't have to do that, it's up to you, but whatever you do, make sure you do the same on the back as well when you attach the lining. Now, when we do the lining, again, we'll be doing it right sides together, fabric right sides together, and we'll be stitching all the way along the top and then doing like an understitching. But before we do that, we're just going to stitch our ties on. So I'm just going to stitch along there to keep the ties in place. Now don't make it too far away from the edge, because otherwise it will look silly when you add your facing, your lining. So keep it quite close to the edge, but not too close. So I've stitched those on, and I'm just going to trim away the excess like that. So what happens is, when everything is all attached, then they end up being the right way round, yeah? So now we attach the lining. Now I'm going to demonstrate this on the back bodice piece, but you probably don't know any different because they're more or less the same, but it is a bit smaller. So this is my wrong side, isn't it? Because you can see the inside of the darts. So we want to put it right sides together with our fabric. Okay, everything all lined up. Make sure it's the right way up as well, so you've got your wider part of your dart at the bottom. And then just start pinning it into place. Now I've got a very exaggerated centre notch there, just so that you could see it, but don't you do it that big. Because your seam allowance at the top isn't so big, unless you're going to make it bigger. So just pin that down so it doesn't move, and I'll find a pin. And then when you're happy that everything's lined up, you are going to start at that edge there, and whatever seam allowance you decide, it doesn't have to be as small as mine. And in fact, if you have got a tricky fraying fabric, don't make it too small. Also, I didn't say this, if your fabric is a bit weak, you may need to apply interfacing, which you would iron on first of all. I didn't say that, did I? So you're going to start at the edge, you're going to go backwards and forwards, and this is your journey of sewing. You're going to sew along the top like this, coming along, coming along, coming along, and stop at the other side there. So I'm going to go forwards and back, and I'm going to sew to that first pin. And the seam allowance that I'm doing is I've got the edge of the sewing foot on the edge of the raw edge of the top of that bodice. And as I go along, I'm going to take the pins out. Now I'm sewing over where the strap goes into the bodice. So I might go backs and forwards there a bit, just to sort of reinforce it. I'm now coming over the first dart. So I'm going to double check everything's good. And I don't want to change the direction of the dart. Now I've got to go past my massive notch. So I'm going to make sure I include that. And then I'll pause there. And now we're going to do exactly the same thing, but head back on the other side. We're going all the way to the edge. So that's what you've just done. But by the time it's all pressed back and folded back, it will end up being like that. Now there are many ways in which you can do this, and I'm doing it in this kind of two-dimensional way because I just feel that it's easier for beginners. And when I show you the other 2 or 3 designs of this perfect party dress, the different version of the bodices, I'll show you different techniques that you can use. Now before we do anything else, we're going to put it back like this. We're going to make sure that our seam allowance Okay, this is, seam allowance here is pushing towards the lining because we're going to do this thing called understitching. Now when we do understitching, in this situation we need the straps to be on the side where the the front bodice, the actual fabric is. We need the lining to be this way, and what we're going to do, can you see that? We're only stitching on the lining or the facing and the seam allowance. Right, so I'm not going to go backwards and forwards now, just in case I should have to undo it for some reason, and it will be absorbed into a seam later on, so it will be okay. So this is a small seam allowance. This is like, I don't know, a large millimetre. You do it whatever you want. I'm in a really awkward position. You do whatever you want, but just make sure whatever you decide you stick to it. So just stop when you get to the other side. And I'm not going backwards and forwards. Right, I'm hoping that you can see that. If I hold it still, can you see that? So what that does is that makes the facing or the lining stay down. So when I go like this, but I still need to press it, it should stay down. Don't think that you can leave out the pressing part. I mean, you can if you want and just do it at the end, but I think it's so much more pleasurable to do it as you go along and sort of appreciate your work as you go along, because it just looks much nicer, doesn't it, when it's all pressed. So that's what we have so far, and that's the nice fitting back part of the bodice. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but that is my frilly front. So whilst I'm not going to do a tutorial on it, maybe I can show you this. So if I open it out, you can see that all I did was, before I attached the lining, the facing, I laid my straps down and then I added my frill and then I added the lining, but I'm not showing you that today. So, quite nice, I think. So look, can you see where I've inserted the frill, which is a bit naughty really. But look, it's looking really good. So this is my centre, and that's my box pleat, and this is where my gathers begin, but I do wish I'd done it a bit nearer. So I want you to separate your facing, your lining from your outer fabric, so it looks like that, and then I want you to flop over your bodice so that your fabric is right sides together. And then just start putting a few pins in to hold it into place. Sorry about my arm. Okay, and you've basically got to make it fit in the space of the upper bodice. So what I usually do is I line up my sides, because then once I've lined up my sides and my middle part, I'm going to flop it over actually. Oops. I can see how much I need to gather my fabric to make it fit on the bodice. So I'm going to have a fiddle with that now, and then I'll show you when it's done. Now my seam allowance is whatever I used for doing the gathers, because we don't want to see the gather stitch line. So really, if I'm honest, it is bigger than a centimetre. I've gone for more like 1/2 inch really. Now as you sew, arrange your gathers. Yeah, just go slowly and sort of flatten and arrange them as you go along. And be really careful that there isn't a pin hiding somewhere underneath. So I'm fiddling about, I'm sort of pulling them apart so that I know that they're definitely flat and not flat, straight. This is the bit where I wished I had I really do as well. I wish I'd done the gathers a bit nearer. So I'm just doing some fake gathers there, which hopefully will look all right. Now I'm sewing over the box pleat. And go backs and forwards in the middle. So I thought you want to have a look again. So we let our lining hang down, yeah? So we just sewed it from this side, and I'm showing you there. Fold back the lining a bit for now, and then fold back all of it. And then you can see a bit the distribution of the gathers. I've mainly made it happen around this area here, which I might regret. And then I tried to do some fake gathers there, which I do regret. But anyway, I'm just going to carry on. So I'm going to do what I did here on that side as well, and then that will be the whole front section done. So that's where we're at so far. Goes down there like that. But let's focus on the back now. If your back skirt is going to be the same as your front skirt, then just do exactly the same thing that we just did. But for me, I didn't have enough fabric, so I've decided to use this ready-made black blue taffetas. So I'm just going to gather up that side and then do exactly the same thing, where I just attach it onto the back outer bodice fabric. So there we go. That was really easy because it was already made. So I've attached that onto the back, and now all we have to do is open out our linings, make sure that the seam allowance is pushed up. So all the seam allowance must be pushed up. You can press it up and it will make it easier. And then we do the same on the front as well. Lay it on top right sides together and just sew all the way down. It's so easy. Right, so I'm putting my front right sides together now, lifting up my straps, lifting up the lining. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to line up are where the skirt joins onto the bodice. So this is my front and this is my back. I'm going to line those lines up, and I'm going to make sure that everything is pushed up towards the bodice, and then I will put a pin in there. So I can put a pin in there. Feels a bit bulky, but it's just doing it this way is the easiest way for beginners, okay? Now I'm going to line up the side seam of where the bodice meets the lining. So they've got to be perfectly, exactly the same as well. And I'm going to put a pin in there. and then I'll put a pin in the middle. So that's why whatever seam allowance you do when you attach things, it's okay so long as you're the same for everything. So I'm even going to pin the linings together, which is difficult for you to see because it's black. So I'll pin the lining together as well. So you can see that I'm just going to continue all the way down. So this is the back skirt, this is the front. Yours would be the same because you would have enough fabric. So I'm going to pin those. So when I've done that, then I'm ready to sew. Now if I can recommend, you will do the same to the other side as well. Can I recommend that you first of all sew from just below the bodice, like, I don't know, 2 centimetres, an inch below the bodice. Can I recommend you sew that bit first, okay, and then sew going down the skirt bit. Just indulge me. So I'm starting just past where the bodice joins to the skirt. I've pushed my seam allowances up on both the back and the front, and stitch length is about 2.5, 3. So I'm going to sew up to the join. Now on the pattern I do say it's a centimetre seam allowance, but I don't think I'm doing a centimetre seam allowance at the moment. So you go over that bulky bit there, which we're going to trim back afterwards. Come up the side seam. Now because you've got everything pinned, it should all line up nicely. And then just head down the lining. Now when you go down the lining, just do yourself a favour and take a smaller seam allowance, because usually with the linings you kind of need a bit more fabric to play with, only a little bit. And then when you get to the end, go backwards and forwards. Okay. So we've just done that, and while I'm here, I might just trim back some of the bulk. And the same on the back. So look, I'm just doing little squares into it. Right, so now I'm going to sew down the side seam of the actual skirt. Now that's really straightforward. Now if you were doing inseam pockets, apart from you watching our inseam pocket tutorial, at this point you would be heading around the edges of the inseam pockets and then down the side seams, but we haven't got those today. So I'm just over sewing where I sewed before, so I don't need to go backwards and forwards, and I'm simply heading all the way down the edge of the fabric, and then when you get to the end, go backwards and forwards. Okay, now I want you to have a look at what we've just done. It is important to trim away the bulk. It is important to push your seam allowance up into the bodice. It's important to press it all, particularly around those areas. Now what happens is that you're going to be able to do this. You're going to be able to easily fold that back, put a little pin there, okay, go all the way along, making sure that it's dead flat. Okay, and then do the same at the front. Now I'm not going to do all of it, I'm just going to show you a little bit because we need to do the other side as well. You've got to make sure it's flat and then put a pin in. So what I'm trying to show you is that this is an easy way, to get a neat finish inside. And then let's look at the right side. So look, so I haven't properly pressed it, but look, you get a really neat finish on the other side, and you can see why it was important to match those things up. Now obviously you can do these in a round, so you would join the skirts together, gather it, join the top together in a round, and then gather it and then attach the two. But I've found that with beginners they get a bit confused with that. But you need to finish off that hem. You can do it on machine or by hand. You need to hand sew that lining facing down in the way that I briefly showed you. And maybe in another video I'll show you how to do patch pockets. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. See you again very soon. This pattern is called the Perfect Party Dress, and it is on our Etsy page, and all the other versions you can do in the same way, or you can wait until I upload the video. Bye!